Hello, everybody. My name is Bradley DeFolio, and for our cybersecurity project number 2, our group chose to go with database-driven website as our topic. So I'll be running you guys through my section and my research. So first up, I have a quick section overview for you guys outlining all the topics that I'll be covering today. So first, I'll run you guys through the essential skills and requirements that are needed when creating a database-driven website. And then next, I'll talk to you guys about the characteristics, functionality, and differentiation between both static and dynamic websites. So first up, we have the essential skills and requirements that are needed when creating database-driven websites. So first, one must be very proficient in structured query language, also known as SQL. So this is a type of writing knowledge and that acts as a way to alter and communicate within the database. So an example of a functionality of SQL would be updating programs and data inside of the database. The next skill is having the ability to create static websites, specifically with the following programs: hypertext markup program, known as HTML, JavaScript, or cascading style sheets, also known as CSS. So basically what these programs do is they help to create dynamic websites and user-friendly interfaces, as well as interactive content personalized to the user. The third skill is essential design build skills needed for the creation of a database. Databases have lots of data coming in and out, and many people going through the database, and that's very complex. So one must have the proper design build skills needed to both create the database and alter the database. The fourth skill that I identified was the ability to write basic coding while using a server-side scripting language. This can be done through two programs, one called Hypertext Preprocessor, as well as Cold Fusion. So if you guys look down at the image I have below, this is a quick example of what a database-driven website looks like. So first, on the far right, there's a database server. So that's the basic server that houses all the data inside. Then there's a firewall for some protection. Then it moves over to the web server. And before the web server actually shares that information with the end user, there's one more firewall. And with that firewall, you see that it branches out into 3 different browsers with 3 different end users. So that's what I was talking about with the dynamic websites. All the content is very individualized. So something that I'm seeing on my end, whether that's an advertisement or just information about the website, it might be different than yours because of my consumer behavior or internet behavior. Next up, I'll talk to you guys about the 2 forms of websites called static and dynamic. So just based off of this image right here, you can see that static websites are much simpler than dynamic websites. Dynamic websites have many more elements to it, and dynamic websites are also known as CMS. So first, we'll talk about the static website characteristics. So static websites tend to stay the same for all viewers and do not use external databases to alter data. So that's really important. So like I talked about before, essential skills of HTML codes. When you're working with static websites, a programmer must have sufficient HTML skills to alter those codes, because that's the only way that you can mess with it. Static website designs are the most basic form of a website, which is simple to create and work best with smaller sites. So like I talked about before, there's not too many functionalities to it and they're not super complex. So therefore smaller sites would benefit more by using this type of website. So next I'll talk to you guys about the advantages and disadvantages of static websites. First, it's easy and cheap to both host and develop static websites. So that's one of the big value propositions when it comes to that. But like I said before, it does work better on smaller websites. So some of the disadvantages are content is viewed as stagnant from viewers, and extensive web development skills are needed to alter this data. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's easy and cheap to host and develop, but it's also really hard to alter data, and you need quite a lot of skills in doing so. So right here, I have an altering static website design right here. So as we talked about before, those HTML codes, those are the only ways to mess with the data inside there. So as you can see here, this is an example of how that's done. Next up, we'll be moving on to dynamic website characteristics. So dynamic websites are a lot different than static websites. So on the dynamic websites, content and information is changing depending on the following factors: how many viewers are on the site, the time of the day, and the time zone. So it's really geared to creating individualized content for that user. Content in a dynamic website is stored in a database or content management system. When the database is altered in a dynamic website, the website itself also changes. So therefore, if a programmer alters something, then the user, once it's published, will get to see that end result as well. Data is constantly being collected from website views, resulting in the generation of new content for the viewers. And this is done through different website cookies, IP addresses, and browser types. Like I talked about before, consumer and internet behaviors, that kind of goes hand in hand with that. So now we'll move on to the advantages and disadvantages of dynamic websites. So first, it's easier to update versus the static websites. There's no need to have HTML skills to do so, and it contributes to maximization of website visitors. So like I said, with that individual website, with that individual content, it really keeps the customers coming in and also coming back to revisit the website. When it comes to the disadvantages of dynamic websites, it's known to have slow performance and it's costly to host. So if you think about it logically, there's much more going on in a dynamic website, so it will bog down that system a little bit, causing some slow performance. But over time, as innovation of technology happens, I would assume that speed would get much quicker. And then also, since you have so much data and it's going to many different places, that does get costly to host versus a more simple website design, such as a static website. So right here, I just have an example, an illustration of how a dynamic website works. So on the left, you have a database server. In the middle, there's a web server. And on the right side, there's a client web server. So on the contrary of the static website, it was more of a fluid motion throughout. But as you can see here with the different arrows, the database works with the web server and it also works with the client web. So it's kind of like a circle of life, making sure that we're really analyzing who's viewing the website, what their behaviors are, and how can we get them to come back. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you guys have any questions, I'm all ears.